The Ten Commandments. It is the most important and poignant instruction on objective morality ever devised, written by God himself. It has shaped current-day law around the world, especially in Western culture, and most people around the world, especially in the United States and other Judeo-Christian nations, have at least heard of them. But how many people truly know them? If someone were to ask you right now, name all 10 commandments, could you do it? If you could name all 10, would you be able to explain what they mean? Well, hopefully after the next couple of episodes, you'll be able to do just that, because in them, we will be exploring the 10 commandments. What are they? What do they actually mean? How do they fit together into one cohesive, objective moral standard? And also, what does Jesus have to say about them? There's a lot of ground to cover here today, so we'll be diving into the first 4 commandments in the book of Exodus, which deal with duty toward God. And next week, we'll be exploring commandments 5 through 10, which deal with duty toward other people. So let's get to it. I'm Kellen Tichenor, and this is the Bumpy Narrow Road. So today we're discussing the first 4 of the 10 commandments. There are over 600 commandments in the Old Testament, 613 to be exact. But we're going to be dealing with the 10 commandments, and these are the ones that really encapsulate all of morality and don't include some of the other commandments that deal with more specificity of what these commandments tell us to do, in addition to some things that were like ceremonial or civil or ritual laws. So this is the 10 commandments that Moses took down from Mount Sinai. And in preparing for today's episode, this is coming from my own personal notes that I've taken over the years. Is also coming from different readings, which I'll cite them when I can during today's message. And it also came from a seminar on the book of Exodus. And it was a whole series led by Jordan B. Peterson. And there was a whole panel of scholars that I've mentioned this before in other episodes, including Dennis Prager, Jonathan Pageau, Stephen Blackwood, and more. And I'll be including some of that into today's episode. If you have a chance to view that and go on there, it's an absolutely phenomenal series of seminars. There's a lot. There's 17 episodes, and they're average about 2 hours long. But I went through the whole seminar series a while back, and it is mind-blowing. And this is the book. The whole entire thing is just the book of Exodus, and it is amazing. So if you have a chance to view that, I would definitely recommend it. All right, so let's get into it. So, setting the stage, the Israelites have been freed by God from the Egyptians. They were slaves in Egypt, and they were under Pharaoh's thumb. And working through Moses, who was leading them, as well as his brother Aaron, who was helping him, God brought them out of Egypt, and they're in the wilderness, and they've come to camp at Mount Sinai. Moses has gone up to the mountain, and God is giving him the instructions to bring back to the Israelite people. And I also learned that 10 Commandments is obviously it is a fine way of describing it. I also understand that in the Hebrew, it's almost a little bit more of translated to 10 instructions, but 10 Commandments is absolutely fine for what we're talking about today. So keep in mind that this is after God has performed several miracles. He's led them with the pillar of smoke during the day and fire at night. He's led them through the Red Sea. He's parted the Red Sea. He's closed the Red Sea on their enemies on their way out. He's given them manna to eat when they were hungry. He's given them quail. He's given them drinking water from a rock. I mean, he's given them dirty water that could change into clean water by throwing a piece of wood in there. He performed all these miracles. The Israelites have, of course, constantly grumbled throughout this whole thing. And to be honest with you, I mean, we like to look back at that. We like to say, oh, Israelites, they kept on complaining about everything. You can't really say that if you were in their position. I mean, yes, obviously seeing God, and that's like, how do they see God, see all these miracles, and still not have faith? But you could also look back at that and say, okay, if you're starving in the desert, are you not going to be grumbling too? So I had to keep that in mind too, because sometimes I like to say that, like, oh, they're just, these whiny Israelites. Yes, they're whiny, but until you've been in someone else's shoes, I mean, you can never really say that you wouldn't do the same thing. So One thing, Robert S. McGee, who wrote a book called The Search for Significance, he said that these commands, and I really like the way he put it, that they shouldn't be thought of as just restrictions, that they really have two purposes. One is to protect us from the destruction of sin, and two is to direct us in a life that is more joyous and more fruitful. So, and they were written in stone too, which, I mean, we always say that, when something's written in stone, that means business. So this is God literally writing it in stone. Let's start with commandment number 1, which is, you shall have no other gods before me. So Exodus 20, 1-3 begins this way. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. So right from the beginning, there is this reminder from God of his sovereignty and of his grace and his mercy. He's saying, I'm God, and remember, I just brought you out of Egypt. I just brought you out of slavery. And it establishes this authority for the 10 commandments, because without that authority to begin with, the commandments mean nothing, because commandments only mean something if the person that is commanding them has some sort of authority. And this is what God is establishing right from the very beginning. So what does it mean? So number 1, God must maintain the focal point of our lives. There should be nothing that in our lives that we place higher than God. That's the most obvious thing. And the other thing is, God wants a very personal relationship with us. So the reason that God wants us to put him first is because he created us in his image, and he's always putting us first. He put us above his own son, above Jesus. And to ask for that in return is minimal on our parts. He was the one who created us. He's the one who's given us everything that we have. He is the source of all goodness, all love. And he's just saying, you know what? Every good thing comes from me. Everything comes from me. But you need to put me first above all those other things. So what does the other gods refer to? So number 1, loving or worshiping anyone or anything more than God. That's basically what it means. Making them more important than God. So this, a good example of this is money. This is one that people, I think, like to use a lot, and it's a good example. Although it's not evil in and of itself, we've talked about that in past episodes, that it's not that money is the root of all evil. It's that money is the source of a lot of different kinds of evil. And it depends on how you use that money. It's not that money has some sort of intrinsic evil to it, but and I have to correct myself now, it's the love of money that is the source of all kinds of evil. So it's not even money itself, it's the love of money. But money is a good example of that, because we can absolutely place money above God. And the way that we do that is by making attaining money more important than our relationship with God. We'll spend much, much more time on trying to get money, which, of course, we need money to survive. But when you're putting the emphasis of the love of money above the love of God, that's where it goes wrong. Codependency can be another way of breaking this commandment, because what you're doing with codependency is and it's especially if you're using the other person as your moral compass. When you're looking to somebody else to guide you, to give you morality, that is a big problem, because that morality and that guidance is supposed to be coming from God. So when we're doing that, we're replacing God with a person. And if you begin to find your identity in that other person, that's another way of breaking this commandment, because again, our identity should be in God. Our identity should not be with any other person on this earth. So if you are focused on pleasing someone, then that is breaking this commandment, because God's saying, you know what, you don't live to please anyone. You don't live to identify in someone else. I've given you an identity. I've given you purpose. And it's all that we should be doing is to please God, not to please humans. Another example is placing personal success as a top priority in your life. Personal success can absolutely be a god? And this is a very easy one for people to fall into, especially ambitious people, because being ambitious is a good thing when it's done for the right reasons. And ambition is something that just has this kind of automatic good connotation to it. Like if you're ambitious, man, you're on a good path. That means that you're going to be successful. But what are you being successful at? And that's the real question. You can be successful, but are you being successful at work and being an absolute failure of a husband and an absolute failure of a father? Because if that's the case, then your success is not where you should be having your priority. Your priority shouldn't be on having success in your job. It should be having success at being a child of God and loving the people and the things that he's put you in charge of, that he's put you as being a steward of. So when you begin to make concessions in your morality in order to attain success, that's a big indicator that you've got a problem. If you're saying that I know I really shouldn't do this, but there's no other choice. I have to do this if I want to get to be where I want to be. And sometimes you'll even make that excuse in your head. If I'm going to provide the kind of life that I want to provide for me and the kids and my wife, my family, I've got to suck it up and do it. But that's wrong, because what you're doing is you're taking the place of where your morality should be with God, and you're saying, I'm going to put this thing above what God has told me to do. God has said, don't do this, but I'm saying that I need to do this in order to attain this goal. And what we're saying is it doesn't matter as much what God said and God commanded me to do. That's not as important. That doesn't have as much worth as what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to attain. And what happens is your life priorities get all out of whack because you're focused on doing this specific thing. And again, you're neglecting your family, you're neglecting your wife, you're neglecting your relationship with God, you're neglecting the way that maybe you are meant to be a disciple to other people, and you're neglecting those things in order to do something that is for who? Ultimately, it's for yourself. Because when you're ignoring all the things that God tells you to do because you want to move up in your job, make more money or any of that kind of thing, then you are literally making yourself more important than God. So let's get to what does Jesus say about this first commandment. In Matthew 22, 34 through 37, it says, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. So when other things are occupying our mind or our heart, then we can't put our full attention on God. And if that seems extreme, well, yeah, all your heart, all your soul, some even say all your strength, all your mind, that's a little bit too much. But you have to remember, if that sounds extreme, God already loves us far more than we could ever love him. He has absolutely perfect love. And if he loves us like that, why should we not try our very best to reciprocate that? Jesus then tells us this, Matthew 22, this is verse 37 through 40. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Then verse 38, this is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So how does everything hang on these two commandments? So let's go through our examples from earlier. So money, and we talked about how we can put money above God. So if you put God first, you won't do immoral things to get money. If you put God first, if you have money, you'll use it more likely for good things and not selfish things or evil things even. You also won't put your self-worth or others' self-worth in the amount of money that they have. So how much money you have in the bank account won't determine it shouldn't determine how you feel about yourself. Because what should be more important is who does God say that you are, not Who does the bank account say that you are? And also in terms with other people. Do you look at someone who has more money as somehow elevated above someone else who has less money, or yourself? And I can say I do this a lot. If I see somebody that obviously is well put together, maybe has a nice suit on, and I can tell they have a nice job and a nice house, I automatically elevate that person above myself. This person has more together than I do. They're better off. They're doing something that I should be doing, and that's the wrong attitude to have. It's not a bad thing to have those things. It's not a bad thing to have money, but it's a bad thing to make that what determines a person's worth. Let's look at codependency. So if you're following God, he can actually help bring you out of that codependency, because it gives you a consistent moral compass that isn't determined by someone else. So instead of looking to someone else for what would they do in that situation, because whatever they would do in that situation determines what I should do in this situation. It gives you the Bible, God's word. It gives you a specific moral compass. And these 10 commandments give you a specific moral compass of what you should do, regardless of what anybody else around you is doing. Regardless, because everybody is flawed and everybody is sinful and everybody makes mistakes. And if you follow other people, you are always eventually going to follow people into sin or follow people into doing something wrong or making a mistake. The only way that we can know that what we're doing is right or wrong is by looking at God's word. The other thing is, you won't find your identity and worth with another person. You'll find it with God. And the good thing about that is when you put your identity in someone else, that person can then alter your identity. They can change your identity. But when you find your identity and worth with God, nobody can alter that. Nothing changes that. Your situation doesn't change it. What other people say about you doesn't change it. Bad things that happen to you don't change it. Good things that happen to you don't change it. Your identity and your worth stays consistent because God says that we are his children. God says that we are made in his image, and there's absolutely nothing that anybody could do that could possibly change that. And the other thing it does is your time and energy will be spent to please God and not to please other people. So pleasing other people can often lead to resentment because you work so hard because you want to make this person happy, and then what happens if they don't see what you did? What happens if they saw it and they don't recognize it? And you'll be looking for some sort of feedback from them. And if you don't get the feedback that you think you deserve or the feedback that you like, you end up resenting that person. And it's pleasing to God to be focused on him, because being focused on him leads to your life being better. And when you do that, it leads to purpose. And that I think is possibly the biggest way out of those type of codependent relationships or relationships where you want to please somebody else. Because when you are focused on, what is pleasing to God, that gives you, again, a purpose that doesn't change in your situation. It gives you something that actually gives your life meaning. And then you won't be looking for that meaning in other people. And then let's look at personal success. Putting God first keeps your priorities straight. So all these commandments are actually, like we said in the beginning, are designed to protect us from sin and to bring us more joy and to help us have more fruitful lives. So it's not about just following these rigid rules for no apparent reason. You can see just in those examples that following these commandments and doing these things, they have purpose. It's like God is saying, look, this is how reality works. This is how true reality works. And if you stay in these guidelines and you do these things, this is going to give you the most optimal, fruitful, joyous life. So how does it fit into an objective moral structure? First of all, morality comes directly from God. It doesn't come from a man. It doesn't come from individual societies making decisions on what's moral and what's not moral, there is, in fact, an objective morality. There is a morality that is written on our hearts. There is a morality that exists in us that is not dependent on people making decisions about it. This is, if you want to think of it this way, this is God revealing things to us. It's not making it up as he goes and just coming up with rules to make us dance. He is revealing what reality actually is to us. And all the other commandments depend on this first commandment, because if there's no commitment to putting God above everything else, then the things of the world will cause us to not follow the other 9 commandments. If we're not putting God first, then when he tells us not to steal, well, I really, really, really want that. I know God told me that I shouldn't take it, but I really want it. I really feel like I need it, so I'm going to take it, because you're putting that need above God. So putting God first helps us to follow the next 9 commandments, and I believe that's why it's first. It's setting the stage for, I'm going to give you the rest of these commandments, but first of all, you have to understand, I'm God. I'm revealing to you truth. I'm revealing to you what reality is, and there's nothing more important than me. I am telling you truth, and all the things that you'll come against in this world, all these thoughts, all these situations, all these sins, they are below me. And I'm telling you to follow these things because this is what's best for you. And it all stems from that first commandment of putting God first. The second commandment is, you shall not worship idols. Exodus 20:4-6 says, you shall not make for yourselves an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or in earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So there's a lot to unpack here. So first of all, what does it mean? Let's start with verses 4-5. It tells us that we are not to worship material things made from human hands, and that we're not to worship creation. So we are to worship essentially the creator, not the creation. God is saying, there is nothing that can come from you that can take the place of me. There's nothing that you can accomplish that I didn't give you the ability to do. And a good example of this is the Tower of Babel. People began to worship their own accomplishments. It's in Genesis 11:4. They say, we will make a name for ourselves, not a name for God. They wanted to create this great city. They wanted to build a super high tower that will reach to the heavens. And it was making a name for themselves. It had nothing to do with God. It was about elevating humanity, elevating ourselves to make ourselves more like God. And, people can create nothing. People can't truly create anything. Let's say when you build anything, you build a table. Okay, you got wood, you got screws, you got all this stuff, and you got the different pieces, and you screwed them together. You got bolts and nuts and washers, all this kind of stuff, and you haven't created anything. You've simply rearranged what was already here on the earth. Everything that is made up on the entire earth, it doesn't matter what it is just rearranged stuff that was already created. We don't create anything. I mean, you've even heard people say, well, scientists can let's say this. Even if a scientist could create life from non-life, which has never been done, okay? You'll never have any scientist that's been able to understand or be able to explain to you how you can go from something that's not living to something that's living. No scientist can do it. No scientist can explain how that happens, what makes the difference. Even evolutionary scientists cannot tell you how anything can go from non-life to life. But even if they could, even if they could say, I can take this and I can make it alive. Can you speak into existence those things that you need first? I mean, you can't, again, even if you were able to do that, which they can't, even if they could, You can't create the elements to begin with to be able to do that. You are simply rearranging what has already been created for us. So we really like to elevate ourselves, elevate our technology, and elevate this stuff to think that somehow we're doing something, and we're not. We can't create even a single thing. So God is also saying nothing in creation is worthy of worship as God. Nothing is this is a big mistake that people make today, because many times you'll hear, I hear it's stupid to worship God, but we need to worship Mother Nature. Somehow elevating nature above God, but somehow worshiping God is dumb, but worshiping nature is good. I mean, animals have become more important than God, and even more important than people made in the image of God. I mean, there are several states in the United States where abortion is legal, and harming the egg of a bald eagle is illegal. And you could get jail time for harming an egg of a bird, but we should celebrate abortion. That's how backward it's become. And if we place this is what we've done, is we've taken God, and somehow what we've managed to do is we've managed to place God below animals and then place animals above us. It doesn't even make sense, the order of it, but it's completely mixed up and backwards in society today. It makes absolutely no sense. But this is a part of idol worship. It's we need to worship all these things that we're doing. We need to worship our own accomplishments. Even with AI, I think that's a danger with artificial intelligence too. I think artificial intelligence is great, but I also think it's very harmful if people view that as the stopgap for all of our mistakes. Well, we mess things up, but AI is going to take care of it. Or, well, being so proud of ourselves, we've created AI. Now we're creating robots. We're creating these machines that we like to make act like people or act like animals in some instances, and it's all mimicking God's creation. And I'm certainly not saying any of that stuff is bad. I think that's extremely interesting. I think it's very interesting to look at all these robots and things that AI is able to do now. Hopefully it gets a little more useful, but maybe it could do my taxes or something. But I mean, AI is a very, very amazing thing, but we have to be careful that we don't elevate ourselves, that we don't think of ourselves as like some sort of God, that we've created these new beings that have artificial intelligence, that have abilities to do things that we can't do. So that's just something that I think we need to be cognizant of, and that we need to be aware of, that we don't start elevating our own technology above God. And we're definitely in danger to do that, because God, in a lot of cases, is continually pulled down and knocked down below other things. So verses 5-6 tell us that God is a jealous God. So what does this mean? It's jealousy, but it's not in a human way. Humans are jealous in a sinful way, because the reason that we get jealous is because we want something for ourselves. We're jealous of somebody paying attention. If you're dating, let's say, and somebody that you like is giving someone else attention that you want, and you're jealous of that. It's not because you're concerned so much about her well-being. It's because you are concerned about what you want. You want that woman's attention, so you're jealous of the attention that she's giving this other person. And that's our own jealousy is based upon our own personal wants, but God's jealousy is out of love for us. What God is saying here is that if you love these other things, it leads to sin, it leads to death. If you love me, then I am going to give you eternal life. I'm going to give you everything that is good. If you go the other way and you love those other things, you are going to lead yourself into really bad places and you're going to be separated from me. It's out of love for us and out of God knowing what's best for us that he's jealous for us. And that's a completely different type of jealousy. Now, this next part here, where it says that I will, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. There's a very important note to make here. And this is something that that I came across during that seminar. And it was Dennis Prager who was talking about this. And he's Jewish and he knows Hebrew. He knows Hebrew scripture. He knows the translations. He can read Hebrew. And when I found what he was talking about was that the King James Version says that instead of punish, it says to visit. Okay, and that's just kind of a little bit of a different feel. But the Hebrew translation, what he was saying is to remember. And that's a very, very different meaning to it, because if you replace that, if we go back up here and we say, I am the Lord and we God, I'm a jealous God, remembering the children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generation, that could mean much more of a empathy. It's God saying, I remember what your parents did. I remember how your parents treated you. I remember how your parents raised you, and I'm going to take that into consideration. And that is a completely different meaning to the commandment, to that portion of the commandment. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So you might say, okay, well, if something can be that different and translations can be that different, then how can we trust any of the Bible? Because the Bible can be, if words can be translated in different ways, how do you actually know that you're getting the meaning of what the Bible is supposed to say? And what I would say to that is, yes, things can have multiple meanings. God knew that things would have multiple meanings. And I think that's one of the things that's actually incredible about the Bible, is that things like this, I think, can mean multiple things at once, which is a mind-blowing thing. But you think about it this way, that children are punished to the third and fourth generation for the sins of their parents. Now, it says in the Bible that you cannot punish us, as humans. We are not allowed to punish children for the sins of their parents. So that would go against that. But what I think it is saying here is that when we choose to do evil things, when we choose to do the things that we do and go against God, it affects our kids. It affects their kids. It affects more than just ourselves. So if you want to be selfish and you want to say, well, I want to do these things because I want to do them, you need to remember that it's not just a decision you're making for yourself. It's a decision that you're making for generations to come. And at the same time, I think it's saying God understands that. And God understands that when parents raise their kids in sin, that he is going to remember that. He's going to remember the fact that they were raised in that type of situation when he makes judgment. And I think that is a really incredible, really beautiful thing, is that I think that the Bible, even though translations can be different, I think because God knows everything past, present, and future, he knew obviously what these translations would be. And I think that it's an incredible thing that he can include multiple truths even within the same word. So what does Jesus say about this? Number one, the verse of Matthew about loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, as well as several other verses in Scripture, Jesus is teaching us undivided worship of God, leaving no room for worship of anything else. And that's the thing, is when you're truly giving God your all, you're not leaving room to give parts of yourself to things that are sinful and things that are bad. You'll have room to give yourself to your kids, because that is part of what God is calling us to do, is to love our kids, to love our family, to love our wives. and to love other people. So it leaves room for loving other people. That's still following God. And when we follow God with all our heart, soul, and mind, then that's exactly what's happening. But when we choose to stray from God, when we choose to go follow anything other than God, that we're not giving ourselves fully to God. Another thing, too, that I wanted to mention was that and this is another thing that Jesus says, that it's better for a person to have a millstone tied to their neck and thrown into the depths of the sea than to cause a child to stumble. And that's Matthew 18:6. And I actually wanted to say that about when we choose to do sinful things and we choose to not follow God, and how that affects the other generations. And I think that's another part that ties into that sort of punishment. And I also wanted to say that the part where it says that showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Notice that it's punishing children for the sin of their parents, or remembering to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So I think that's another thing, is that it's saying that type of love is so much more potent than not following God. Because God is saying, if you're not following me, you're going to mess up the generations that come after you. If you love me, that is going to carry through 1,000 generations. That type of love of God is so much more potent than just, and that gives us hope, because if your parents maybe weren't the best parents, if your parents didn't follow God, yes, it affects you. But I think it's very comforting to know that when you break that cycle, and when you choose to follow God, and you choose to follow what's right, that you're making a change, not just for the same way. You're not just making a change for yourself. You're making a change for 1,000 generations. You don't understand the impact that you're making when you make that decision to follow Jesus. When you make that decision to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, you are changing things for the better for 1,000 generations. So how does this fit into an objective moral structure? So it tells us that revelation of morality comes from God directly. It comes in a very personal way, and it's written on the laws of our hearts, and nothing can get in the way of that. Nothing should be in the way of that. There's no intermediary to morality. There's certainly no replacement for it. And that's something that we are in very big danger in society today, of people saying and thinking that morality is just something that is a construct of different societies or of different people, and how everybody can have their own morality. That's absolutely 100% not the case. And this is what the 10 Commandments are telling us, there are things that are wrong, absolutely wrong, that doesn't change. And there are things that are right, and there is no substitution for those things. Nobody that comes can change those things, because again, this is God revealing reality. The reality of the situation is that these things are right and these things are wrong. And if you want to go making up your own morality, you're not making up your own morality. You are being immoral. Commandment number 3 says, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord. And this is obviously said a lot of times as taking the Lord's name in vain. Exodus 20, verse 7 says, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Let me go over a few things this doesn't mean. Saying Jesus when you stub your toe on the coffee table. Saying, oh my God, in exasperation. I tell my kids not to do that, because I think it's just more out of respect. Or swearing and using the Lord's name. That's not what this is talking about. Honestly, that's a lot more trivial than what it actually means. So what it means is doing evil things and saying that you're doing it in the name of God. That's the heart of what it's talking about. Like killing someone and then saying that you did it because God told you to do it. And the reason for that is you do something evil and it tarnishes your character. It tarnishes you. When you do something evil and you try to say, well, I was doing this because God told me to do it, you're tarnishing the character of God. And you're trying to pull God down. And that's why it's so much heavier than that. It's not about, you said God's name and you didn't say it in reverence, or you weren't saying it in prayer. It's much of a bigger deal than that, because when you are doing something evil, or you're doing something, even just something wrong, and you are using God's name to do that evil, then you are trying to convince other people that God actually isn't good, that God has flaws. And that's a much more dangerous thing, and that's a much heavier sin than saying Jesus when you stub your toe. So what does Jesus, speaking of Jesus, what does he say about it? So for one, hallowed be your name is in the Lord's Prayer. It's right there. So he's recognizing the weight and the holiness of God's name. And he also talks about not swearing by God's name. And by this, I mean like making promises. In Matthew 5:33 through 37, it says, "Again, you have heard that it is said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." And this is basically saying that we don't have the authority to swear by God's name. And that's kind of ties into the other thing, because if you are making a promise and you're swearing by God's name, then what happens if you don't fulfill your promise? So who's to blame? God? Because you swore by his name that you'd do it? And that's what I believe is part of what Jesus is saying here is you don't need to swear anything. Stand on your own reputation. Say yes or say no. And if you say yes and you don't do it, that's on you. That's on your own reputation. It's not on God's reputation. You can't swear by God. And I think that's what it means there. So how does this fit into an objective moral structure? Well, we have personal accountability for our own shortcomings. God's not responsible for us breaking a commandment, and we cannot misrepresent him by attributing something evil to him. It's saying, I'm not going to bring you into the equation for what I do. I'm responsible for what I do. And I'm not going to try to attribute any of my own actions to saying that it's controlled by God or it's because God told me to do it. I'm not going to blame it on God. I'm going to blame it, good or bad, on myself. Commandment number 4, keep the Sabbath day holy. Exodus 20:8 through 11 says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreign resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." So notice that it includes all the tools that we have at our disposal for working. So even animals, for instance. And back then he was even saying if you have servants, you're not even allowed to have them work either, because it's saying, you don't get to say, well, I'm resting today, but everybody else is going to do my work for me, or even animals, they're going to do my work for me. And he's saying, no, you are taking today and you are making it holy. And this is modeled after creation. God created everything in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So God doesn't need rest. It's not like after the 6th day, he was like, man, I'm so tired. I'm so worn out from all this creating. I really just need to stop for a day. He never gets tired, but what he was doing is he was modeling it for us. He was modeling for us it's not a 24/7 work cycle. You need to be able to do your work, and then you need to be able to rest. And the other thing it does is when you rest on that seventh day, you do those 5-6 days of work in our society, and then you rest on the seventh day. It also gives you a conclusion to your week. And if you had a bad week, it allows you to conclude that week, leave it behind you, and move forward. If you had a good week, it gives you kind of that conclusion. This is a great week, moving behind me, and now I'm moving on to the next week. And it's good for us psychologically as well. The Sabbath day is a day to remember and recognize God as the creator. And if you want to think about it that way, every time that we are recognizing this seventh day as a day of rest, we're calling back to that original creation story. We're calling back to the original creation where God rested on the seventh day, and we're saying, I'm following his example. So it should be, in part at least, calling back to saying, God created everything, and remembering that, and modeling what we do after what God showed us. So what does it mean to keep it holy? Well, holy means to set apart. So number one, you don't treat it like every other day. Your Sunday should look different than every other day during the week. And not just because of church. Church is a great way of doing that because church is once a week, obviously, on Sundays. At least the main sermon is once a week. And so that is part of your day that looks different from everything else. And of course, that should be something that you do on Sundays. That is something that is set apart to God. You're honoring God in that time. But what about after church? What about when you get home? So number one, you don't work. So that's obvious. We shouldn't be working on Sundays. This is something that I struggle with because for me, if I am doing things during the week and I have a really busy week, sometimes if I feel like I didn't finish what I needed to do during the week, sometimes I have to fight really hard not to try to catch up on things on the weekend, on Sunday. And that's a struggle for me. It's something that I try to do. And sometimes what I will try to do, and don't take this as biblical. This isn't God saying this. This is just Kellen saying this. Sometimes if I know that I have to do something on Sunday, I try to kind of take that Sabbath day on Saturday and say, okay, well, I'm going to at least take this day to rest, and I'm going to try to honor God by not doing anything today. Now, I'm not saying that that's the way it should be. I'm still on this road. I'm still trying to make myself better, and I'm trying to follow God's word and Jesus' example better. But that's just something that I do. I don't know if that's right, but that's just what I do. Another thing is you'll be more productive. And this is, studies have shown this too, and I've talked about this before, but you'll be more productive when you rest. And this has been shown that when people are working 7 days a week, they are working a lot of hours, but during those hours, they're not nearly as productive as those that have a break and are able to recuperate and are able to refresh and then come back. So if you think you're being more productive, you may actually not be. You may actually be less productive, even though you're putting in more hours. I think the other thing to be careful not to do is just to busy yourself with other work that's not your job on a Sunday. So you get home from church and you spend the whole day, doing yard work or whatever. It's not a bad thing to do yard work, but unless it's something that you're doing with your kids maybe, or with your family where you're interacting with each other and you're admiring nature and things like that with your kids, that might be a way of being able to do that and also still keeping the day holy. But if you're just busying yourself with housework and doing that kind of stuff, and you're not paying attention to your kids, you're not paying attention to your family, then you're not really keeping that day holy. You're still, and that's why, it says very specifically, I think that's why he went through, hey, you're not doing any work. You're not having other people work for you. You're not having your animals work for you. And I think because that day you're not supposed to be focused on what can I get done today. You're supposed to be focused on how can I honor God today and how can I make this a holy day that honors him. And then the other thing is you want to do things that you normally wouldn't do on another day during the week. So you want to do more things that bring your family closer to each other and or closer to God. Anytime that I think that you can do something that with the family that is geared toward bringing everyone closer to God is a great thing to do. But even things that can bring you closer to your family, where things where you can talk to your kids or do something with your kids, I think is something that is a great thing to do on Sundays. So in short, it should be something that you're setting apart during the week as a special day where you are not focusing on getting something done. I think that's maybe a good way of putting it, where you're focusing on God. You're focusing on remembering what he's done for us. You're remembering him for creation, and you're following this commandment of, okay, I'm going to set this day apart to focus on the things that are important. So what does Jesus say about it? Well, for one, Jesus said that the Sabbath is a gift to man. Mark 2:27 says, "Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." And this was coming when Jewish leaders had become way too legalistic. And he said this after they chastised him for picking heads of grain and, crumbling in his hand and eating the heads of grain. Now, and this is kind of cool too. Back in that day with Mosaic law, when you had a field, when you had a crop, there was actually part of the law was that the outside perimeter of the field was for the poor. Any of the poor could come and they could take stuff from your field to eat it. There were certain rules, like they couldn't come and harvest it. They couldn't use a sickle and chop some of it down, or they couldn't load up a basket and take it with them. But if they were hungry, they could come and they could eat some of it on the perimeter. Now, there was also, and this is more what Jesus and his disciples were doing, you could also you could walk through a field. If it was like your neighbor or yourself, you could walk through your neighbor's field and you could pick some stuff and eat it. But it was something where you're not being greedy. You're not filling your shirt up with it and trying to carry it. You're eating it as you go along. He and his disciples were hungry, so they were doing this. And the problem that the Jewish leaders had was that the act of taking it and doing this and eating it was considered work. He was harvesting, and so they were chastising for that. And that's how legalistic and how restrictive it has. And he was saying, hey, look, the Sabbath is a gift to man. It's not meant to, this is actually like the one commandment where it's not restrictive, that and honor your parents. But this is like one of the very few ones that's an actual good gift. And he's saying, man, this is a gift to mankind. This is not meant to make people go hungry because they can't harvest on a Sabbath day. You're getting it completely backward. The other thing that Jesus said is that it's okay to do good on the Sabbath when someone is in need. Shortly after that, and I'll read a version from the book of Matthew, but there was a man with a shriveled hand, and he came to Jesus and he wanted healing. He believed that Jesus could heal him, and they were already getting on him, and they were already saying that he couldn't do. Jesus knew what they were thinking, and they were basically thinking, you can't do that. This is considered work on a Sabbath. You cannot heal on a Sabbath. So Matthew 12:11-12, it says, he said to them, if any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So how does this fit into an objective moral structure? Well, it's important to be humble. It's important to take time to stop and give glory to that which is greater than us. And that's what it does, that it every week, every time on Sunday, it makes us stop. It makes us stop the things that we're so concerned about, that we're trying to accomplish, all these things that we're trying to do. It makes us stop, and it makes us reorient. It makes us say, okay, I have to remember that I'm not the most important thing here, that there is something much greater than me that I need to orient myself to. And it makes us, it kind of tells us you shouldn't get too cocky or impressed with your own accomplishments and with yourself. It humbles us and it takes us down to say, okay, I'm not the most important thing in the world here. God is the most important thing, and we're bringing ourselves back in order to where we need to be. So that concludes commandments 1 through 4, the commandments that deal with how we are to orient ourselves toward God. Next time, we'll start with the 5th commandment, honor your parents, which is a sort of bridge between orienting with God and orientation with other people. I hope that today's episode was useful to you in some way. And if you aren't too familiar with the 10 commandments, I pray that this episode could help you to get a better understanding of those first 4 commandments. And I hope that you'll be back next week as we go through the remaining 6. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and God bless.